Hi, welcome to Pipes and Poetry. Today we're going to talk about not a poem, a novel. We're going to talk about Ulysses, what many people, including me, consider to be the greatest novel ever written, definitely of the 20th century. It's my favorite. So I wanted to talk about it because I often see, I've got this in conversations with people. I've seen it on forums where people ask, what's the deal with Ulysses? Why is it so hard? Can I read it? I did a little short video where I read a part of the opening line showing that you can read it. Now I'll give some tips on reading it here in this longer version. But oftentimes people will say, you can't read Ulysses until you've read Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, which is also by James Joyce. Now, it's a good point to make. I don't believe that, however. I think if you want to read Ulysses, you should read Ulysses. Will it give you some insight? Yes. Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man is about Stephen Dedalus, who is the second main character in Ulysses. There's the main character, I would say, is a guy named Leopold Bloom. Stephen Dedalus is second in as far as his presence is probably shortly behind Bloom as far as the amount of presence he gets in the book. Maybe they're about equal. I don't know. But it really doesn't matter. He's one of the two main characters of Ulysses, and there are a few more main characters, particularly Molly Bloom, Leopold Bloom's wife. So another thing that will come up is people will say, "Well, you have to read the Odyssey to read Ulysses," and again, I disagree. Very, very much so on that one. The structure of Ulysses follows that of the Odyssey, meaning the chapters sort of follow the chapters of the Odyssey, the episodes of Homer's The Odyssey. But that's a structural thing, and you can get that basically by just looking up what's the structure of Ulysses, and it will kind of explain how it follows. There are good companion books. I'm going to talk about them that I recommend, and I'm going to talk about some that I don't recommend. Not that they're not good, but if you want to read it right off the bat, you can get bogged down in reading all sorts of secondary sources. So I will talk about those. But I believe that most adults, and maybe not even adults, but people who have read literature at some level can read Ulysses successfully. One thing to keep in mind, a very important thing, is you're not going to get everything. I've read Ulysses probably 6 times completely through. I've had a class on Ulysses in college at Georgetown. I've read certain chapters of Ulysses maybe 100 times. I don't know if it's quite that much, but definitely up in the high double digits. Again, the chapters are labeled according to the Odyssey, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But just keep in mind, you're not going to get everything at once. You're not going to get every illusion. If you try to, you'll get bogged down. If you just follow the characters, try to keep in mind who's speaking, where they are, what's the setting, you'll get a good read of Ulysses, and I think that most people will enjoy it. Now, what I will talk about well, the first thing that comes up, which makes it, nothing about Ulysses is uncomplicated. The version that you read is a source of great debate amongst professors and Joyce enthusiasts alike. It's been raging since, the second version came out. Which one should you read? I recommend, this is just my recommendation, this one. This is let me see if I can get it to focus. Maybe. Yep. It's the Oxford World Classics Ulysses. That's what I recommend. The one I first read, however, is this one. This is I don't know if you can see it, the Gabler edition. Gabler went through, fixed some errors that he thought were errors, and not that Joyce made the errors, but he thought they may be printing errors, publication errors that could have happened, and he numbers all the lines, which makes it really convenient. If you were to follow scholarship on it, a lot of them refer to line numbers, but it doesn't matter. I think the Gabler, I don't think I lost anything by reading this one first. I did read the other one, the Oxford World Classics, just so I could have read both of them. But I would recommend the Oxford World Classics, just, if you wanted to. But the Gabler is just as good. You're not going to miss out. If you've got a copy of one, just read it. Don't think you need to go get a different copy. Now, scholars and Joyce enthusiasts will argue with me about that. Hey, that's my opinion. I think you can read either one. You're not going to get, I don't think you're going to lose anything by reading one over the other. Okay, now a book you should not get, at least not right away. And don't get it and don't open it and start reading it, because then you're going to be tempted to look up everything, and it's just going to get in the way of your reading of Ulysses. And that is this book. Let me see. Ulysses Annotated. Now, it's a great book. You go through here, it goes line by line. It gives you like what is being alluded to there. It gives you a ton of information. It does outline the chapters, which are good. A good intro to the chapter, but I'm going to show some other books that are better for that. But it gets really in depth. And we'll see. I'll talk a little bit about what this book does. Again, it's a good book to get, but get it after you've read it once or twice. Another thing I will talk about, I have my theory is, and it's just mine. I don't think you've read a book until you've read it twice. That doesn't mean you have to go and read a bunch of scholarship or secondary sources or anything like that. But I highly recommend, almost with any book of value, you read it, maybe give it some time, read something else, watch TV series, whatever you do, give it a week or two, or even longer, and then go back and read it again. It's good to read the book from the perspective of knowing how it's going to end. I don't recommend going and looking up how it's going to end, because you want the surprise and the of not knowing how it's going to end, and to read it the first time. But after you read it the first time, I highly recommend you read it a second time. I mean, I recommend reading it as many times as you can, but definitely, if you can, read it twice. And I recommend that with every book. I just finished reading Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. I never got around to it. I've read, a lot of books, but just never got around to that one. And with his release that he's coming out with 2 new books, I was like, let me jump on the train and get on some Cormac McCarthy. And I plan to start second reading probably tonight or tomorrow. All right, so I did not recommend getting the annotated Ulysses yet, anyway. But there are 2 books that you can or that you probably should get, I would recommend, and again, this is my opinion. There are two. One is, let's see, James Joyce, Ulysses. I don't know if you can see that. It's a study by Stuart Gilbert. Now, Stuart Gilbert was a friend of James Joyce. He is actually the person I think that Joyce gave the outline to first as far as the chapters. They don't have titles in the book, but all the Joyce scholars and Joyce fans know the chapters or look them up, and they call them by the name. Like the first chapter is called Telemachus, who was Ulysses' son in the Odyssey, the Latinized version, not Odysseus, right? The Gilbert one is good. I recommend it. This book, it has a big introduction, which talks about reading it, which is highly worthwhile. I'm not big on reading introductions. I'm the type of person who, once I hear something piques my interest about a book, and I want to go get the book and I want to read it. Usually I don't even read the introduction that's in the book if it has one. I start reading the book. I don't want to have to go read, Portrait of the Artist. I don't want to have to go read the Odyssey. I want to get into, if for some reason I had never read Ulysses and I'm out somewhere and something sparks my interest, I've done this before with other books, I want to get to the book. Now, I did read Portrait of the Artist before Ulysses. I'd also read Dubliners prior to Ulysses. And I read all of those, or read both of those a few times. I read Portrait of the Artist several times, just one. I read it when I was really young, and I didn't know what was going on, but I knew James Joyce was important, and I wanted to figure it out. But I think if you got a good guide like the Gilbert here, and he goes chapter by chapter, pretty much talking about, what's going on in the chapter. It helps orientate you to what's going on if you start getting lost in the prose, which you can get lost. But like I said, if you keep in mind who's speaking, where you're at, what the setting is, and who's talking, and just try to gain a gist of what they're saying, it's really not that hard. Now, some chapters are harder than others, particularly Oxen of the Sun, which you'll find out if you start looking up what the chapter and I call them titles. Again, Joyce did not use these as titles, although he did provide the framework to Stuart Gilbert, among other people. And these are what they're called in the Joyce world. Oxen of the Sun, I think, is 10 or something, maybe 12, somewhere around there. Wandering Rocks is another tough one, and probably the toughest one is one called Circe, and I think that's the third from the last. Let's see, Penelope, Ithaca, no, Eumaeus, maybe it's, fourth from the last chapter. Those will be difficult. Don't get me wrong. Those will be difficult to get through the first time, but if you get a good guide. Now, the guide that I recommend, I recommend this one. This is a very good guide. But the easier one, and the one I would recommend if you only got one, is this one. It's called The New Bloomsday Book, A Guide Through Ulysses by Harry Blameyer. This one is a lot shorter. There is a very brief introduction, like 2 or 3 pages about reading the book. Then it gets right into the chapters, which I said, the come on, focus. Yeah, the first chapter is referred to as Telemachus, which is Ulysses' son in the Odyssey. Now, again, the Odyssey is just a structural device. You don't have to know all about the Odyssey. You don't have to have read the Odyssey. If you want to, go read the Wikipedia on the Odyssey. I'm not saying don't read the Odyssey. The Odyssey is great, and I think everyone should have that in their background. But if you want to get into Ulysses, don't let that hinder you from starting. regardless of what anybody says. I mean, again, this is my opinion, but I know how I am. And once I hear something, I want to get into it. And I don't want to read a bunch of other junk. Now, this, like I said, if you do, I would recommend reading, if you could read the chapter first, or maybe get through part of the chapter and then come see what Blameyer says about it. And it might help you orientate yourself. In some cases, I would probably just read the Blameyer first. Each chapter in here is probably only, some of them are longer. I think Telemachus is the first one, is a relatively short chapter in itself, so it has a relatively short explanation. But read through it, find your way that works. I read my first time, I would read through the chapter. Some of them I would just be looking at words. I'd get lost. I'd come back, might come to Blameyer. Some of them I would finish the chapter, come see what Blameyer said, and I would actually maybe reread the chapter too. But I don't think you have to. See what Blameyer says, read the chapter, come back to Blameyer, read the chapter. Whatever works for you. I don't think there's a right or wrong way to go about it. Now, to address those people who say you shouldn't use source material to read the book, just read the book. Well, that doesn't really work. It can work for Ulysses. I did not read it that way. I don't know if I would have made it through if I read it that way. But get the guide. The guide's there. And for anyone who argues that, you're not really reading it if you get a guide, tell them to go read Finnegan's Wake. Go read Finnegan's Wake, no source material, open it up, start reading it. If you're like me, or if they are like me, anyone who criticizes you for using a guide, you're not going to get through it, period. Go read the first page of Finnegan's Wake and let me know what you think. So to all those critics, just either ignore them, tell them what they can do. I mean, my opinion is there's nothing wrong with using a guide for something like Ulysses. And one of the two that I recommended. I don't know if that's the two I think that are the predominant ones. There may be other ones out there. That's the two I've read several times. I mean, as you can see, this book is now, I think there's a newer version. This one is like an 80s version. And I've been through it several times. Every time I read Ulysses, I also read this. And I've read Ulysses completely like 6 or 7 times. All right. So let's see. Just again, from my perspective, just to give you a little bit about how I'm coming to the book. Like I said, I did read Portrait a couple times, A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. I read Dubliners a few times. I think I read I read The Dead in a high school class, but I didn't really care that much for it. I've since come to love Dubliners almost as much as Ulysses. If I were to rank the Joyce works, I would put Finnegan's Wake at the top, Ulysses, Dubliners, Portrait of the Artist. Portrait of the Artist you can get bogged down a little bit in. To me, a lot of people, again, everyone has their opinion. I think Portrait of the Artist is a little bit of a slog. It's got some great language in there, but I really, really like Dubliners. Now, one really cool thing you will gain, if you read all 4 of these works, is you gain sort of a perspective that they could be, and a lot of scholars don't like this idea. I've talked with people that don't like this idea. I like the idea. They could be part of a larger whole in themselves. Dubliners, Portrait, Ulysses, Finnegan's Wake. Like I said, if you want to read Ulysses. Get the guide, read it. Go back at some point, read Portrait, read Dubliners. But just for an example of the way I look at them as a whole, sort of, is that they both start with a bedroom, in a bedroom. Dubliners opens with a young boy looking up at a lighted window of a bedroom where his friend, a priest or ex-priest, has died. It ends. This is Dubliners I'm talking about now. It ends with the final short story, "The Dead," in a hotel bedroom where the main character is, looking out at the snow, and it's actually I think, one of the most beautiful pieces of the English language you'll ever read is the final chapter or final paragraph of "The Dead," which is the final story in the Dubliners. Portrait opens in a bedroom with a young man being read a sort of a children's story or tale or something like that. Excuse me. And it ends in his bedroom, in Stephen Dedalus' bedroom, as he's packing his clothes to go to France. Ulysses starts in the Martello Tower, and it's not necessarily a bedroom, but people have just woken up. They're at the top of this tower taking care of their morning duties. We'll see. I'm going to read through part of it. That Buck Mulligan is shaving. So it is a wakening up in their domicile. So, and then it ends, Ulysses, we'll just say ends in a bedroom too. And Finnegan's Wake pretty much takes place. You can look at it, and one way of looking at it is it completely takes place in a bedroom. It could be a dream. Anyway, there is merit to that. Okay, so we've gotten through how you can look at all the works of James Joyce as a whole, if you so desire. And if you want to, do it. Don't worry about what scholars say or anything like that. All right, let's take a look. Okay, so this is the basically the first page. I think it's the first page. Let me look. Okay, so it's a little more than the first page, but we'll stop at where the first page stops, which I think is right here. So, can you read Ulysses? We're going to do it right now. Stately, plump Buck Mulligan came from the stairhead, bearing a bowl of lather on which a mirror and a razor lay crossed. A yellow dressing gown, ungirdled, was sustained gently behind him on the mild morning air. He held the bowl aloft and intoned a Latin phrase. Now, I do recommend also keeping your phone near and looking up anything that's in a foreign language, especially like the Latin, because Ulysses has a lot to do with the Catholic Church, the different liturgies or rituals, whatever you have. I'm not Catholic. I don't know all about that. I've learned a lot from studying Ulysses and studying James Joyce about the Catholic Church, but I don't know all of it. So if you look that up, okay, so literally it means go up to the altar of God. And it's the Latin phrase, or it means I will go up to the altar of God. And what Buck Mulligan is doing here, this first character we get, is starting a sort of a mockery of the Catholic Mass. So one, let's notice that we have our first character, Buck Mulligan. He's plump and stately. He comes from the stairhead. He's carrying his bowl of lather and razor and mirror that he will use to shave for the day. And this is a quick reason why you shouldn't get this book, although it does tell you quite a lot. We'll just take a look just to show you what it would give you if you did have it. It talks about the bowl. The bowl will become the chalice that's used in the Mass. In the scene that follows, typically the chalice would contain wine, which is become during during the Mass becomes the blood of Jesus. Then there's a razor. Yellow has significance. He talks about what yellow is here and what it means like when the priest wears yellow. I think it's for a mass of a certain season, and all of that's in here. But you really would get bogged. I mean, you're not even a sentence through, and you're already bogged down in all of this. You don't need that on your first read through of Ulysses. It's not gonna be helpful, I don't think, unless you have a lot of patience. So, like, all this meaning is in there, but let's just bypass that for now, and just realize that, hey, we're invoking the beginning of the Mass, or Buck Mulligan is here, and he's wearing, he's carrying a bowl of lather, a razor, a mirror, and he's wearing a yellow dressing gown that's ungirdled. So he's exposing himself to the world. He's naked. Anyway, so he says this Latin phrase, which I won't attempt to butcher again. Halted, he peered down the dark, winding stairs and called out coarsely, "Come up, Kench, come up, you fearful Jesuit." Now, this is where a lot of people would say you need to have read Portrait before you read, because you would understand that Daedalus, Stephen Daedalus, at one point, this is who he's talking to, and Kench is a little nickname he gives him. But you will shortly figure this out, whether you have the background or not of reading A Portrait of the Artist. But in Portrait of the Artist, Stephen Daedalus quite seriously considers, and I think James Joyce even considered himself, because Portrait is kind of autobiographical, but he considers joining the church and becoming a priest. So Mulligan calls him a fearful Jesuit. But even if you didn't know that, you would shortly realize he's talking to Stephen Daedalus. So he says, solemnly he came forward and mounted the gun rest. He faced about and blessed gravely thrice the tower, the surrounding land, and the awaking mountains. Then, catching sight of Stephen Daedalus, who he has just yelled down to come up, he bent towards him and made rapid crosses in the air, gurgling in his throat and shaking his head. Stephen Daedalus, displeased and sleepy, leaned his arms on the top of the staircase and looked coldly at the shaking, gurgling face that blessed him, equine in its length, and at the light, untonsured hair, grained and hued like pale oak. So, Mulligan's up there about to shave. He yells down to his sort of friend. We'll find out more about their relationship. But he yells down to his roommate, hey, come up. And Stephen comes up to join him on top of the tower. They're at the Martello Tower, which is where they reside. We'll go on. Buck Mulligan peeped an instant under the mirror and then covered the bowl smartly. Back to barracks, he said sternly. He added in a preacher's tone, "For this, O dearly beloved, is the genuine Christine, body and soul and blood and ouns. Slow music, please. Shut your eyes, gents. One moment. A little trouble about those white corpuscles. Silence all." Now, Buck Mulligan is quite the character. He's a funny character. He's sort of you can form your own opinion about him, but he definitely doesn't place a lot of weight on really the Catholic Church, or, I mean, he makes a mockery of the Mass. He changes, his sort of makes a joke about the whole converting the wine into the body of Christ. And these are themes that will show up throughout Ulysses, but it's not important. I mean, it is important, but it's not important to your first reading to catch everything and to be intimately familiar with the Catholic Mass process and this whole changing the wine into the blood and how this is making fun of that. You can pretty much get that he's sort of mocking this as he goes along. He peered sideways up and gave a long, slow whistle of call, then paused a while in rapt attention, his even white teeth glistening here and there with gold points. Chrysostomos, another term you could look up. Two strong, shrill whistles answered through the calm. Thanks, old chap, he cried briskly. That will do nicely. Switch off the current, will you? Okay, so this is just the beginning. You're going to learn a lot more about Mulligan. You're going to learn a whole lot more about Stephen Dedalus as you read through Ulysses. But you don't have to get everything at once. Even if you did not know anything about the Catholic Mass, you could kind of get from here. He's sort of mocking something to do with religion. Buck Mulligan is, that is. Stephen's a little more serious guy, even though he has turned away from religion and elected not to go into the priesthood, and sort of has I wouldn't say a bitter view, but sort of a nonchalant view of the Catholic Church here in Ulysses. In some sort of places, it may actually be bitter. But anyway, this is just to show that you can read it. Now, it does get a lot more complicated. Some of the chapters do. But you can get through it. You can just keep an eye on, like I said, if you can keep an eye on who's saying what, you should be fairly well suited to getting through Ulysses. Again, I recommend this book to start with as a guide. Read it. Don't let people tell you shouldn't be reading using a guide. It's perfectly fine to use a guide to get through something as dense as Ulysses. And even with this guide, I mean, this guide's only this big. You're not getting everything you need. Even with this big annotations book, you're not getting anything, because the annotations don't really tie everything together. They just kind of point out every little, nuance that's present, and it will bog you down if you try. I look it up, look things up occasionally when things spark my interest. I don't wear this book out reading through it. So, and then pick your version. Like I said, the Gabler's fine. The Oxford World Classics is fine. Don't be too hung up on that. I would get one of those and go to town. Just get started. That's really, I think, all I've got to say. If you have any questions, please leave them. If you disagree, I entertain any disagreements. I like to argue about literature. So, tell me what you think. Tell me why you should never start Ulysses until you read Portrait of the Artist, if that's what you believe. I will disagree with you. But hey, that's fun. Okay. So this has not been a poem, today, but it's been a novel. I consider the greatest novel. I actually like Finnegan's Wake better, but it's not really a novel. I mean, it is a novel, but anyway, that's a subject for another day. But yeah, just read it. Let me know what you think. If you get stuck and you can't, and you're just like, I got through the first 3 chapters. Well, actually, the first really 6, 7 chapters are very readable. All of it is really readable, except for a few chapters, which I pointed out, which get a little more complicated, but you can do it. You can do it. And you'll find out why my answer is to the question of, can you read Ulysses? It's a big, emphatic yes. Get through it. Let me know what you think. This has been Pipes and Poetry. Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.